The distress beacon screamed across every frequency Jake Morrison's salvage ship could pick up. He shouldn't have answered it. Out here in the scattered rings, most distress calls were pirate traps, or worse. But something about the signal felt different, desperate in a way that made his gut twist. His ship, the Lucky Break, was 3 days from the nearest station and running low on fuel cells. One wrong move, and he'd be floating dead in space himself. The source materialized on his scanner, a sleek vessel unlike anything in the common registries. It was hemorrhaging atmosphere from a gash in its port side tumbling slowly through a debris field thick with the remains of what looked like a military engagement. Scorch marks streaked across polished metal that seemed to shift colors even as he watched. No identification transponder. No standard hull markings. Just that desperate signal pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Jake matched the tumble and extended his docking clamp, fighting the controls as the damaged ship's rotation threatened to tear his arm from its socket. Metal shrieked against metal. His hull integrity alarm wailed. Then the magnetic lock engaged with a solid thunk that rattled his teeth. He grabbed his emergency kit and his plasma cutter, cycling through the airlock into darkness that smelled of ozone and something sweet he couldn't identify. The interior was chaos. Conduits sparked and hissed. Gravity fluctuated wildly, making his stomach lurch. He pulled himself hand over hand through a corridor that seemed designed for beings taller than any human, following the emergency lights that pulsed in patterns his brain couldn't quite process. Then he found her. She was pinned beneath a collapsed bulkhead, her form humanoid, but wrong in ways that made his eyes water. 6 arms, 4 of them crushed beneath the metal. Skin that rippled with bioluminescent patterns, a face that was beautiful and alien and clearly drowning in pain. Her eyes, 3 of them arranged in a triangle on her face, focused on him with an intensity that froze him in place. "Human," she said, and her voice bypassed his ears entirely, resonating in his skull. Unexpected. Fortune or folly, time will determine. Jake dropped to his knees beside the wreckage, assessing the situation with the cold calculation that had kept him alive through a dozen bad salvage runs. The bulkhead weighed at least 2 tons in standard gravity. In the fluctuating field inside the dying ship, maybe half that, but still impossible for one person to lift. Her lower arms were pulped. Blue blood, almost black in the emergency lighting, pooled beneath her. "Can you move if I get this off you?" he asked. "My retainers are dead. My guards scattered or destroyed. You should leave, human. Those who did this will return to confirm the kill. That's not an answer to my question." Her laugh was bitter and somehow sad. "Yes, I can move. Whether I can survive is another matter entirely." Jake pulled his plasma cutter from his belt and started cutting through the bulkhead at an angle, creating a wedge he could lever up. The metal was strange, resistant to the cutter in ways standard alloys weren't. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The ship shuddered around them, and somewhere deep in its guts, something exploded. "They were thorough," she said quietly. "The Vortan Consortium does not leave loose ends. They tracked me across 4 systems to end my influence. Save the story for when we're not about to die," Jake muttered, finally cutting through the last section. He jammed a piece of debris under the wedge and pulled with everything he had. His shoulders screamed. The bulkhead shifted an inch. 2 inches. Now. She pulled herself free with her remaining arms, leaving trails of that dark blue blood. Her lower body was wrong too, more like a serpent's tail than legs, and it had been nearly severed by the collapse. She was dying. They both knew it. "Your ship," she gasped. "Medical bay? I've got a first aid kit and some trauma foam. That's it." "Then I am dead, and you have wasted your time saving a corpse." Jake slung one of her arms over his shoulder, nearly buckling under her weight. "Shut up and move. Dead people don't complain this much." They made it back to the lucky break 30 seconds before her ship's reactor went critical. The explosion lit up the scattered rings like a newborn star, and Jake pushed his engines past their safety limits, riding the shockwave until his teeth rattled and his vision blurred. The alien queen, because that's what she was, even if he didn't know it yet, bled out across his cargo bay floor while he worked with shaking hands to keep her alive. He had no idea that saving her would change everything. That every choice from this moment forward would ripple across star systems and alter the balance of galactic power. He just knew she was hurt, and leaving her to die wasn't something he could do and still look at himself in a mirror. The foam sealed her wounds but turned an angry purple against her skin. She drifted in and out of consciousness as Jake set course for the nearest station, Outpost Meridian, a rough place where questions weren't asked if your credits were good. Her hand, one of the undamaged ones, gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "You have bought yourself either the greatest fortune or the greatest curse in the galaxy, human," she whispered. "I am Queen Valestra of the Lumineth Sovereignty, and now I owe you a life debt." Jake stared at her, his mind racing through everything he knew about galactic politics, which wasn't much. The name meant nothing to him. Just rest. "We'll figure out the rest later. There is no later for my kind without—" Her eyes dimmed, and she went still. Jake's heart hammered as he checked her pulse, finding it thready but present in her neck, or what he assumed was her neck. He'd saved her. Now he had to keep her alive long enough to actually matter. Behind them, the debris field glittered with the remains of her escort fleet, and somewhere in the dark, her enemies began to realize their target had escaped. The hunt was about to begin. Outpost Meridian looked like a rusted knife stabbed into an asteroid, all sharp angles and corroded metal. Jake docked at Base 17, paying the exorbitant fee without argument, because arguing with station security was a quick way to get spaced. He'd wrapped Queen Valestra in every blanket and tarp he owned, making her look like a very large, very lumpy piece of cargo. She was barely breathing. The station's air smelled like recycled sweat and cheap fuel. Jake hired a cargo sled and 2 dock workers who didn't ask questions, just grunted and loaded his cargo without making eye contact. He directed them to the medical quarter, to a clinic run by a Centauran named Dr. Krell, who owed Jake a favor from a salvage job gone wrong 2 years back. Krell took one look at Valestra, and his 4 eyes widened. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea what you've brought to my clinic?" "A patient who needs help," Jake said flatly. "You owe me, Krell. I didn't say anything when I found those black market gene mods in the cargo I pulled for you." The doctor's tentacles writhed in agitation, but he gestured to a surgical suite. "Get her in there, quickly, before someone sees." "If the consortium has hunters here, we're all dead. The WHO, the Vortan Consortium. They control 60% of galactic trade and aren't shy about eliminating competition." "And you," Krell said, his voice dropping to a hiss, "have rescued their primary target. Queen Valestra controls the remaining 40% through her sovereignty. This isn't a medical emergency, human. This is a galactic incident." Jake helped transfer Valestra to the surgical platform, his mind reeling. 40% of galactic trade. He'd been worried about fuel costs and keeping his ship flying. Now he was apparently involved in economic warfare on a scale he couldn't comprehend. Krell worked with impressive speed, his multiple limbs dancing across instruments that Jake couldn't name. Her regeneration systems are shutting down. She's been poisoned. Not just wounded. The consortium used weapons specifically designed to kill Lumineth royalty. Without access to her people's medical technology, she has perhaps 12 hours. Where is her people's medical technology? 3 weeks' travel from here in the core systems. She'll be dead in 12 hours, I just said that. Valestra's eyes flickered open. There is another way. In my ship's vault before it was destroyed, I transferred emergency supplies to an escape pod. Coordinates She rattled off a string of numbers that Jake's implant automatically recorded. Retrieve it. The pod contains enough cellular regenerators to save my life. Your ship is scattered atoms, Jake said. I watched it explode. The pod ejected 30 seconds before detonation. It should be in stable orbit around the third moon of the local gas giant. The consortium will not have detected it. They were too focused on ensuring my death. Krell's tentacles slapped the surgical table. This is madness. The consortium has hunters sweeping this system. They'll track any ship that ventures near that moon. Then I'll be fast, Jake said. How long can you keep her stable? 14 hours, maybe 16 if I push the equipment past safe limits. Then I have time. Jake looked down at Valestra, at this alien queen who apparently controlled more wealth than he could imagine. I'll be back. Her hand caught his again. Why are you doing this, human? You could leave. Collect the salvage rights to whatever you find and disappear. Let me die and avoid the attention of the most dangerous organization in the galaxy. Because I already decided you get to live, Jake said simply. I don't change my mind halfway through. The journey to the gas giant's third moon took 8 hours of hard flying. Jake pushed the lucky brake until her engines screamed protest, weaving through asteroid fields and debris clouds, staying off the main shipping lanes. His scanner picked up 3 consortium patrol vessels, but he went dark and drifted, holding his breath until they passed. The moon was a frozen chunk of ice and rock, barely worth a designation on standard charts. Jake's scanner swept the surface and found nothing. He expanded the search pattern, circling wider, fighting the gas giant's gravity well that wanted to drag him into crushing depths. His fuel cells dropped below 20%, below 15. Then he found it. The pod was wedged in a crater, its stealth system still active, nearly invisible against the ice. Jake matched velocity and extended his recovery arm, snagging the pod and pulling it into his cargo bay. The thing was the size of a small car, made of the same color-shifting metal as Valestra's ship. No obvious way to open it. Open sesame, Jake muttered, then felt stupid. He circled the pod, running his hands along its surface, looking for any kind of interface. His fingers found a depression, and the metal suddenly flowed like water, recognizing his touch, or maybe his DNA from when he'd been covered in Valestra's blood. The pod opened like a flower. Inside was equipment he couldn't identify, arranged in careful rows. Medical supplies, he assumed. And something else, a data core, pulsing with soft light, and a small container that radiated cold even through its shielding. Jake grabbed everything, sealed it in his emergency cache, and ran for the cockpit. The consortium patrol vessel decloaked 300 meters off his port side. Its weapon systems were already hot, target locks screaming in his ear. Jake didn't think, just fired his emergency thrusters and dove toward the moon's surface, using the terrain to break the lock. Plasma bolts carved chunks out of the ice behind him, superheating rock into vapor. His ship shuddered as a glancing hit took out his port stabilizer. Alarms wailed. Jake killed all non-essential systems, routing everything to engines and shields, flying on instinct and prayer. The patrol ship was bigger, better armed, but he was smaller and more desperate. He skimmed across the moon's surface at speeds that would have gotten him banned from any civilized system, threading between ice spires and across frozen plains. A canyon opened before him, barely wider than his ship. Jake dove into it without hesitation, scraping both sides, leaving paint and metal on ancient ice. The patrol ship tried to follow and misjudged the clearance. Its wing clipped a canyon wall, and the resulting explosion lit up Jake's rear camera like a sun-going nova. He didn't slow down until he'd cleared the moon's gravity well and jumped to hyperspace, his hands shaking so hard he could barely work the controls. The trip back to Outpost Meridian took 6 hours. He'd been gone for 14 total. Krell met him at the docking bay, his expression grim. She's fading. Whatever you found, it better work miracles. Jake hauled the medical supplies to the surgical suite, Valestra was barely recognizable, her bioluminescent patterns dim, her breathing shallow. Krell snatched the equipment from Jake's hands and went to work, his professional calm cracking to show genuine concern. The cellular regenerators looked like liquid light. Krell injected them directly into Valestra's major circulatory nodes, and the effect was immediate. Her patterns flared brilliant gold and blue. Her wounds began to close, the mangled tissue rebuilding itself in ways that made Jake's stomach turn. Within an hour, she was sitting up. Within 2, she looked like she'd never been injured. "You came back," she said, her 3 eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made him want to step back. "You actually retrieved the pod. You fought through consortium patrols and risked your life for someone you met hours ago." "I said I would," Jake replied. "I keep my word." Valestra rose from the surgical platform, her full height towering over him. She moved with lethal grace, and Jake suddenly understood why she was a queen. Power radiated from her like heat from a star. "Then we are bound, you and I. You have saved my life twice now. By the ancient laws of my people, I owe you 2 life debts. Name your price, human. Name anything within my power, and it is yours." Jake thought about his struggling salvage business, his ship held together with spare parts and hope, the fuel bills he couldn't pay. He thought about the easy answer, the smart answer. Ask for money, ask for a new ship, ask for something that would solve his immediate problems. "I don't want anything," he said instead. "You needed help. I helped. That's all." The silence stretched. Krell's tentacles stopped moving. Valestra's patterns shifted through colors Jake had never seen before. "You refuse payment for a life debt?" "I'm not refusing payment. I'm saying I didn't do it for payment. There's a difference. No one in the galaxy would turn down a favor from the Lumineth sovereignty. No one. Then I guess I'm the first." Valestra's laugh was sharp and surprised. "You have no idea what you've just done, do you? By refusing immediate payment, by treating a life debt as something beyond transaction, you've activated protocols older than most star systems. You're not just owed a favor, human. You're now under my protection. My house. Anyone who moves against you moves against me." "I don't need protection," Jake started to say, but the station's alarms cut him off. Red emergency lights bathed the clinic. Krell rushed to his monitors, his tentacles flying across the controls. Consortium battlecruiser just entered the system. They're broadcasting demands for all ships to submit to boarding and inspection. They're looking for someone. His eyes found Valestra. They're looking for her. Jake's blood went cold. A battlecruiser, Outpost Meridian, had no real defenses, just a handful of security vessels meant for dealing with drunk miners and smugglers. The consortium could reduce the station to debris in minutes if they wanted. "How long until they reach us?" Valestra asked, her voice calm despite the situation. 20 minutes, maybe less if they push their engines. Then we leave. Now." She turned to Jake. "Your ship is fast? Fast enough to outrun a patrol vessel. Not fast enough to outrun a battle cruiser. It will have to be." Valestra moved to the small container Jake had retrieved from the pod, the one that radiated cold. She opened it with a gesture, revealing a crystal that pulsed with inner light. "This is a quantum communicator keyed to my sovereign guard. Once activated, they will come. But they are 3 days away at best. We need to survive until then." 3 days running from a battle cruiser with unlimited resources, Krell said. "Impossible." "Not impossible," Valestra said, her patterns brightening. "Difficult. Jake Morrison, will you accept a passenger?" He should have said no, should have wished her well, and disappeared into the black like any sensible salvager. Instead, he found himself nodding. "Let's go." They ran. The Lucky Break undocked just as the consortium cruiser launched its first wave of boarding craft toward the station. Jake pushed his engines past every safety limit, routing power from life support and non-essential systems. Valestra strapped herself into the co-pilot seat, her serpentine lower body coiling around the chair in ways that looked uncomfortable but seemed to work for her. "They're tracking us," she said, monitoring the scanner with a calm that Jake envied. 3 pursuit craft launched. "Faster than your ship," I noticed. Jake dove toward the asteroid field that ringed the system's outer edge, a navigation hazard that most pilots avoided. Most pilots weren't desperate. He threaded between tumbling rocks the size of cities, using the interference to break targeting locks. A pursuit craft tried to follow and miscalculated. The explosion briefly lit their rear camera. "2 left," Valestra observed. "You fly well for a human." "I fly well for anyone," Jake corrected, yanking the stick hard left to avoid a collision. "Hold on." He brought them through the field with paint scraped from the hull and his heart hammering in his throat. The 2 remaining pursuit craft emerged on the other side, but Jake had gained distance. He calculated a jump to hyperspace, fingers dancing across the navigation computer. 3 more seconds. 2. The battlecruiser appeared directly in their path, having calculated their trajectory and jumped ahead. Weapon ports glowed with charging energy. Valestra's patterns went dark. "This is how it ends, then. I am sorry, Jake Morrison. You deserved better than to die for a stranger's war. We're not dead yet." Jake killed the main engines and fired every maneuvering thruster in a pattern that sent them tumbling wildly off course. The cruiser's main weapons fired where they should have been, plasma cutting through empty space. Jake fought the controls, fighting to stabilize their spin, his vision graying from the G-forces. They shot past the cruiser's flank, close enough that Jake could see individual hull plates. He fired the emergency boost, knowing it would burn out the system, but not caring. The lucky break leaped forward like a startled horse, and Jake slammed them into hyperspace half a second before physics said they should be able to. The tunnel of twisted space swallowed them. Jake sagged in his seat, his hands shaking with adrenaline. They'd made it. "Barely. Where are we going?" Valestra asked. "I don't know," Jake admitted. "I just picked a random vector away from them. We'll drop out in 3 hours and figure it out then." Valestra was quiet for a long moment. "You should know what you've become involved in." The Vortan Consortium was once a legitimate trading federation, but 30 years ago, they began expanding through aggressive means: hostile takeovers, economic warfare, assassination. They control 60% of galactic trade now, and they want the rest. "And you control the other 40%? "My sovereignty does. We are old, human, older than the consortium, older than most current governments. We do not seek expansion, only stability. Balance. The consortium sees this as weakness. They have been trying to eliminate my house for a decade. Why you specifically? Because I am the last of the direct royal line. If I die without an heir, the sovereignty fractures into a dozen smaller houses, all fighting for dominance. The consortium will sweep in and absorb them, one by one. Everything my ancestors built over millennia will be gone." Jake processed this, staring at the swirling colors of hyperspace. "So by saving you, I've put myself in the middle of a war." "Yes." "Great." He laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. "Just great. This started out as such a simple day. Answer a distress call, maybe salvage some equipment, head to the station. Now I'm running from battle cruisers with a queen in my cargo bay." "Co-pilot seat," Valestra corrected with what might have been humor. "And technically, you're running from battle cruisers with the wealthiest individual in the known galaxy?" "The sovereignty's treasury makes the consortium's assets look like pocket change. Not that it matters if I'm dead." The ship suddenly shuddered, alarms wailing. They were being pulled out of hyperspace. "Impossible. You couldn't track a ship in hyperspace, couldn't force an exit." But the lucky break was dropping out anyway, dumped into normal space in a system Jake didn't recognize. 3 consortium ships waited for them, weapons hot. They've been ambushed. They have a tracker on us, Valestra said, her voice tight. On your ship. They must have tagged you when you went to retrieve the pod. Jake's mind raced. The tracker could be anywhere. Finding it would take hours they didn't have. The consortium ships were already moving to surround them, cutting off escape vectors. His ship was damaged, his emergency boost burned out. They had no weapons worth mentioning, no shields strong enough to matter. Activate your communicator, Jake said. Call your guards. We'll try to survive until they get here. 3 days, Valestra reminded him. We have to evade them for 3 days. Then we better get creative. Jake spun the ship, firing his maneuvering thrusters in a pattern that made no tactical sense but disrupted their targeting solutions. He dove toward the nearest planet, a gas giant with crushing gravity and lethal radiation. The consortium ships followed. You're going into the atmosphere, Valestra said. It wasn't a question. The radiation will mask our signature, and the gravity might shake loose their tracker. It will also crush my ship. Your ship? Jake glanced at her. This is my ship. You said I was a passenger. Passengers don't get a vote. Despite everything, Jake grinned. Hold on tight, Your Majesty. They plunged into the gas giant's upper atmosphere, and the world became violence. The ship bucked and screamed, hull plates groaning under pressure that would have flattened a smaller vessel. Jake dove deeper, into layers of atmosphere that glowed with chemical reactions, where the pressure made his bones ache. The radiation counters went wild, the numbers climbing into ranges that meant death with prolonged exposure. The consortium ships followed, but they were military vessels built for space combat, not atmospheric maneuvering. Jake watched them struggle with savage satisfaction, using every trick he'd learned in a lifetime of desperate flying. He skimmed across pressure fronts, dove through storm systems with winds that exceeded the speed of sound. One consortium ship lost control and was crushed by the gravity. The explosion was visible for half a second before the atmosphere swallowed it. 2 ships left. Jake climbed out of the atmosphere on the planet's far side, his hull glowing cherry red from friction heat. The lucky break had never been designed for this kind of abuse. Warning lights covered his console like a Christmas tree, but they were alive, and they'd lost the tracker, torn loose somewhere in the crushing depths. That was insane, Valestra said, her patterns flickering with what he was learning to recognize as respect. That was Tuesday, Jake replied, checking his systems. Life support was failing. Main engines down to 40% efficiency. Hyperspace drive offline until it cooled down. We've got problems. The 2 remaining consortium ships cleared the gas giant's horizon, still in pursuit. Of course they were. Jake limped toward an asteroid cluster, looking for anything he could use. His fuel cells were in the red. He had maybe one more jump in him, assuming the hyperspace drive came back online. There, Valestra pointed at the scanner. That asteroid. The composition is wrong. It's a hidden station. How can you tell? The Sovereignty has maintained secret way stations throughout this sector for centuries. That's one of ours. If we can reach it, we can resupply, repair, perhaps even find reinforcements. Jake altered course, aiming for the asteroid. It looked like any other rock in the cluster, pitted and ancient. But as they approached, a section slid open, revealing a docking bay lit with the same bioluminescent patterns that marked Valestra's skin. Jake brought them in on the last dregs of his fuel, the landing less controlled crash than he'd like to admit. The station's air smelled of ozone, and that sweet scent he'd first encountered on Valestra's ship. Lights activated at their presence, and a hologram materialized, a lumineth male who bowed deeply when he saw Valestra. My queen, we received your distress call. Your sovereign guard is en route, but they are still 70 hours distant. The station has medical facilities, supplies, and defensive capabilities. You are safe here for 70 hours, Jake said. The consortium knows we're in this area. They'll search every asteroid until they find us. Then we will defend, the hologram said simply. Jake spent the next hour helping Valestra's automated systems repair his ship, while Valestra herself disappeared into the station's command center. She emerged, looking different, dressed now in armor that flowed like liquid metal, carrying weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. She looked like what she was, a warrior queen who'd survived a century of political warfare. The station's defenses are online, she reported. We can hold against standard assault craft, but if they bring the battlecruiser to bear, our shields will last perhaps 10 minutes. How long until your guards arrive? 68 hours. Jake did the math and didn't like the answer. We need to slow them down, make them cautious. If they think we have serious defenses, they might wait for reinforcements instead of rushing in. A bluff, the best kind. One backed up by just enough real firepower to make them uncertain. They worked through the night by station time, Jake showing Valestra tricks he'd learned in a dozen close calls. They rigged fake sensor signatures to make the station look like it had 3 times the weapons it actually possessed. They seeded the asteroid field with proximity, mines cobbled together from spare parts. They created a network of decoys that would show up on scanners as additional ships. When the consortium fleet arrived 30 hours later, they found what looked like a fortress instead of a hidden resupply station. The battlecruiser held position outside the asteroid field, launching probe after probe. Jake and Valestra waited, barely breathing, as the consortium commander assessed the situation. They're buying it, Jake whispered, watching the fleet maintain distance. They think we have real defenses. They're calling for reinforcements, Valestra said, monitoring the communications traffic. 2 more battlecruisers, ETA 40 hours. Your guards will be here in 38 hours. We might actually make this. The next day and a half passed in agonizing slowness. The consortium probed their defenses, sending fighters to test response times. Jake and Valestra operated the station's actual weapons, making every shot count, maintaining the illusion of greater strength. They slept in shifts, grabbed food when they could, and watched the clock tick down. 36 hours. 30. 24. The reinforcements arrived early. 3 battlecruisers positioned themselves around the asteroid field, their combined firepower enough to reduce the entire cluster to atoms. They began a systematic bombardment, clearing the field of asteroids one by one, closing in on the station's position. 12 hours until our guards arrive, Valestra said quietly. The shields will fail in 2. Jake stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through options and finding nothing. They'd run out of tricks, out of time. The station shuddered as a plasma bolt clipped the shields, the impact rattling his teeth. I'm sorry, he said. I tried. Valestra's hand found his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle. You did more than try, Jake Morrison. You gave me time I should not have had. You fought for a stranger, risked everything for someone you owed nothing to. That means more than you know. When the consortium breaches this station, I want you to take one of the escape pods. Run. Live? Not happening, Jake. I said not happening. We started this together. We finish it together. The shields failed an hour later. The station's hull buckled under direct fire. Jake and Valestra retreated to the command center, sealing emergency bulkheads behind them. The consortium would breach within minutes. Jake checked his sidearm, knowing it was useless against what was coming, but needing something in his hands. Then the sensors went wild. Massive hyperspace signatures appearing at the system's edge. 1, 5, 20, 50. The Sovereign Guard had arrived early, and they hadn't come alone. The fleet that materialized was beyond anything Jake had imagined. Ships that dwarfed the consortium cruisers, each one radiating power that made his hair stand on end. They moved with coordinated precision, surrounding the consortium fleet in a formation that left no escape. A hologram appeared in the command center, a luminous female in armor, even more elaborate than Valestra's. My queen, we received your emergency beacon. The attack on your person has been noted and will be answered. Stand by for extraction. The consortium fleet tried to run. The Sovereign Guard didn't let them. What followed wasn't a battle so much as an execution. The guard ships moved like dancers, their weapons reducing the consortium vessels to expanding clouds of debris. Within 10 minutes, it was over. A guard ship docked with the damaged station, and soldiers in gleaming armor swarmed through, securing the area with military efficiency. Their captain approached Valestra and knelt, her forearms spread in a gesture of respect Jake didn't understand but felt deeply. My queen, we have retrieved your vault from the debris field. Your house stands ready to serve. What are your orders? Valestra's patterns blazed gold. Secure this system. I want every consortium asset within 10 light years identified and neutralized. They attacked royalty. They will learn the price of such arrogance. And the human? The captain's eyes found Jake assessing and dismissive in equal measure. The human is under my personal protection. Jake Morrison saved my life. Twice, he will be treated with the respect due to a member of my house. Is that clear? Yes, my queen. The journey to the luminous sovereignty's core systems took 2 weeks aboard a guard dreadnought that made Jake's salvage ship look like a child's toy. He spent the time recovering, processing everything that had happened, and trying to understand the sheer scale of what he'd stumbled into. Valestra found him on the observation deck, staring at the stars. We arrive tomorrow. I wanted to speak with you before we enter the capital. About what? About what happens next. You saved my life, Jake Morrison. In doing so, you prevented the consortium from achieving their goal of destroying my house. The economic implications alone are staggering. Wars have been prevented, trade routes preserved, millions of lives saved from the conflict that would have erupted from my death. Jake turned to face her. I didn't do it for economic implications. I know. That's what makes it remarkable. She moved to stand beside him, her height making him feel small. By our laws, you are owed compensation. 2 life debts. You refused payment before, but I cannot leave such debts unresolved. It would dishonor both of us. I don't need anything, Balestra. I'm serious. What you need and what you deserve are different matters. She activated a holographic display, showing numbers that made Jake's head spin. This is the standard compensation for saving a member of the royal family. It's a substantial amount, enough to buy a fleet of ships, establish a trading company, live in luxury for several lifetimes. That's insane. That's protocol, but I'm not offering you that. The display shifted, showing something else, a structure, elegant and impossible. I'm offering you a choice. Take the money and go back to your life. Or accept a position in my house, as my consort. Jake's brain stuttered to a halt. Your what? Consort, partner. The luminous bond with those who save their lives, Jake. It's more than political, more than economics. You've seen me at my weakest. You didn't exploit it, didn't betray me, didn't ask for anything in return. That kind of loyalty is beyond price. By accepting you into my house as consort, I tie my fate to yours. We become partners in truth, not just allies of convenience. I'm just a salvager. I don't know anything about politics or running an empire or whatever you do. You know how to survive. You know how to make hard choices under pressure. You know how to be decent when it would be easier not to be. That's more valuable than any education in statecraft. She paused, her patterns shifting to colors that might have been hope or fear. I'm not asking for a romantic relationship, though. Our laws would allow it if both parties consent in the future. I'm asking for a partnership. Someone I can trust absolutely in a world where trust is currency more rare than platinum. Jake thought about his ship, still in need of repairs, his salvage business that barely kept him fed, the life he'd been living scraping by on the edges of civilization. Then he thought about the past 2 weeks, about fighting impossible odds and somehow winning. about Valestra's hand on his shoulder as the shields failed, about trust earned in fire. If I say yes, what happens? You become one of the wealthiest individuals in the galaxy, you gain access to resources beyond measure, and you gain enemies who will spend their lives trying to kill you because you're close to me. Sounds dangerous, extremely, and if I say no, you take the money, return to your life, and live well. I make sure the consortium never touches you. We part as friends. Jake looked out at the stars, at the vast galaxy stretched before him. He thought about safety and comfort. Then he thought about the look in Valestra's eyes when he'd come back with the medical supplies, when he'd refused to abandon her on the dying station. "I've got one condition," he said finally. "Name it, I keep my ship, the Lucky Break. I don't care how many fancy dreadnoughts your navy has, that ship got me through everything, and I'm not giving her up." Valestra's laugh was bright and genuine. "Done. We'll refit her with proper engines and weapons. Make her worthy of a consort's personal vessel. She's already worthy. Then we'll make her legendary." They shook on it, her hand engulfing his, and Jake Morrison, salvager and survivor, became something new. Not just wealthy, not just powerful, but connected to something larger than himself. Bound by choice and trust to a queen and a cause that would define the rest of his life. The luminous sovereignty's capital world, Axios Prime, was beautiful in ways that hurt to look at. Cities of flowing architecture that seemed grown rather than built, oceans that sparkled with bioluminescence, skies that cycled through colors Jake had no names for. The royal palace stood at the heart of it all, a structure that reached toward the clouds like a prayer made solid. Jake's arrival was met with ceremony that made him profoundly uncomfortable. Thousands of lumineth, their patterns blazing in synchronized displays, lined the landing platforms. Valestra walked beside him, her armor replaced now with flowing garments that shifted like water. She'd tried to put him in formal wear, but he'd insisted on keeping his salvager's jacket. A compromise had been reached, the jacket cleaned and repaired but fundamentally unchanged. "They want to see you," Valestra murmured as they walked. "The human who saved their queen. You're already becoming a story. I hate stories where I'm the main character. Then you chose the wrong path, Jake Morrison." The throne room was vast enough to have weather. Jake stood before assembled nobility, representatives from 100 worlds, all of them watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Valestra took her place on a throne carved from a single crystal, her presence suddenly distant and regal in ways that made Jake's chest tight. "I present to you Jake Morrison," she said, her voice carrying through the chamber without amplification. "Human, salvager, and savior of the royal line. He is hereby granted the title of royal consort with all rights and privileges thereof. He is my partner, my ally, and under my direct protection. Any who move against him move against me. Let it be known across all systems." The chamber erupted in whispers. Jake stood straight, meeting the eyes of those who stared at him, refusing to be intimidated by wealth and power he still barely understood. A lumineth noble stepped forward, his patterns dark with skepticism. "My queen, with respect, this human is untested, unknown. To grant such a title to an outsider without proving his worth is unprecedented. His worth was proven when he pulled me from a collapsed bulkhead while my ship died around us," Valestra said, her voice sharp as a blade. "It was proven when he fought through consortium patrols to retrieve medical supplies that saved my life. It was proven when he refused to abandon me even as battle cruisers reduced our shelter to rubble. If you question his worth, Lord Kethis, you question my judgment. Do you wish to do that publicly?" The noble's patterns flickered, then settled into subdued acceptance. "No, my queen, I merely seek to understand." "Then, understand this. Jake Morrison embodies what our sovereignty should aspire to. Loyalty beyond price. Courage beyond reason. Decency that exists not because of law or expectation, but because it is simply who he is. We have grown soft in our wealth, cautious in our comfort. He reminds us what it means to risk everything for what is right. The ceremony continued for hours. Jake was presented with credentials that gave him access to resources he couldn't begin to calculate. He was introduced to advisors and military commanders and economic ministers, each one assessing him with varying degrees of skepticism or hope. Through it all, Valestra remained a steady presence, making clear with word and gesture that he was not just tolerated, but valued. When it finally ended, she led him to quarters that were larger than any ship he'd ever owned. Windows overlooked gardens that seemed to grow in impossible directions. The furnishings alone were worth more than his entire salvage career. "This is too much," Jake said, feeling lost in the space. "This is standard for a consort. Your actual estate is being prepared. It will take another month to complete." "My what?" "Estate. Every member of the royal house maintains a residence. Yours is being constructed to human specifications with a few Lumineth adaptations for when I visit." Jake sat down heavily on something that adjusted itself to his body in ways that were almost unsettling. "When you visit, did you think this was purely ceremonial?" Valestra's patterns shifted to something that might have been amusement. "We're partners now, Jake. That means working together. I need someone I trust to help manage aspects of the sovereignty that have grown complicated. Trade negotiations? Alliance building. You have a perspective none of my other advisors possess. I'm a salvager. You're a survivor with practical experience in how real people live and work. Do you know how rare that is among nobility? Most of my advisors were born into wealth, educated in theory, isolated from the reality of what their decisions mean. You've lived on the edges. You know what it's like when every choice matters. So you want me for my poverty perspective. I want you because you're honest. Because you don't want anything from me except to help. Because in a galaxy where everyone has an agenda, you somehow managed not to have one." Jake thought about that, about the strange path that had led him from answering a distress call to sitting in a palace on an alien world. What happens now? Now you learn, meet people, understand how the sovereignty functions. In time, I'll ask your opinion on matters of state. For now, you adjust. It's a lot to process. That's an understatement. Valestra moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you, Jake, for everything. I know this isn't the life you chose. I chose to help you. Everything else follows from that. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Most people aren't me." Her patterns blazed gold with what he was learning to recognize as deep emotion. No, they certainly aren't. The following weeks passed in a blur of education that made Jake's head spin. He learned about the sovereignty's structure, a federation of aligned worlds held together by economic treaties and mutual defense pacts. He learned about the consortium's history, how they'd grown from legitimate traders into something darker and more dangerous. He met with ambassadors, military strategists, and economic advisors, each one teaching him pieces of a puzzle he was only beginning to see whole. He also learned about Valestra herself, the woman behind the title. She was 340 years old, which was young for Lumineth royalty. She'd inherited the throne after her mother's assassination by consortium agents 20 years prior. She'd spent 2 decades building alliances and strengthening defenses, always knowing another attack would come. "I thought I'd die in that attack," she told him one evening as they reviewed trade reports in her private study. "When the consortium fleet surrounded my ship, when my guards fell, one by one. I'd made peace with it, but you kept fighting because giving up meant they won, meant my mother died for nothing, meant the sovereignty fragmented and millions suffered. So yes, I kept fighting. And then you showed up. This impossible human who decided I deserved to live. Everyone deserves to live, That's what makes you remarkable, Jake. You actually believe that. The consortium made their next move 3 months after Jake's arrival on Axios Prime. A diplomatic delegation arrived requesting an audience with the Queen. Valestra agreed, though her security forces made clear that any aggressive action would be met with overwhelming force. The consortium's ambassador was a being Jake didn't recognize. Crystalline and angular, its voice like breaking glass. Queen Valestra. The consortium extends congratulations on your survival. The attack on your person was the work of rogue elements, not sanctioned by our leadership. We seek to rebuild relations between our organizations. Rogue elements, Valestra repeated, her patterns dark. The same rogue elements who deployed a battlecruiser and huntercraft? The same rogue elements who used weapons specifically designed to kill Lumineth royalty? Regrettable misunderstandings. The consortium wishes to move forward. To that end, we propose a merger of our economic interests. Combined, we would control all galactic trade. Stability for everyone. Stability under consortium control. Stability under joint leadership. We recognize the luminous sovereignty's valuable contributions to galactic commerce. Jake watched from his position behind Valestra's throne, reading the subtext beneath the diplomatic language. They were trying to buy their way out of consequences, offering a partnership that would effectively dissolve the sovereignty into the consortium's power structure. Valestra's laugh was cold. You tried to kill me, failed. And now you offer partnership? No. The consortium will withdraw from 12 disputed systems, pay reparations for the attack on my person, and submit to independent trade audits. That is my counteroffer. The ambassador's form flickered with what might have been anger. You overreach, Queen Valestra. The consortium's patience has limits. As does mine. You have 1 week to respond. If you choose conflict, know that I have detailed records of your organization's illegal activities over the past 30 years, records that will be released to every major government if you move against me again. Your choice, Ambassador. The delegation left in cold fury. Jake waited until they were gone before speaking. That was risky. That was necessary. The consortium respects only strength. Showing weakness invites another attack. What if they call your bluff about the records? Valestra's patterns shifted to something that might have been amusement. It's not a bluff. My intelligence services have been gathering evidence for decades. The consortium has engaged in slavery, economic terrorism, and political assassination across hundreds of systems. One data release and they face prosecution from a dozen major governments. So why haven't you released it before? Because it would destabilize half the galaxy. The consortium, for all its faults, does maintain trade routes and economic systems that billions depend on. Destroying them without a plan to replace those systems would cause suffering on an unimaginable scale. But if they force my hand, I'll do it. Some things are worth the cost. The week passed in tense preparation. Valestra mobilized the Sovereign Guard, positioning fleets at strategic points. Jake watched it all, learning, understanding more each day about the weight of decisions that affected entire star systems. The consortium's response came exactly 1 week later. They agreed to withdraw from 10 of the 12 systems. They offered partial reparations. They rejected the audit demands. It was a compromise that gave Valestra most of what she wanted while letting the consortium save face. They blinked first, Jake observed. They calculated the costs and found them too high. For now, they'll try again, eventually. Different tactics, different timing. But for now, we've bought time. Time for what? To build something better. The consortium is right about one thing, Jake. The galaxy needs stability, unified trade systems, clear rules that everyone follows. But it needs to be done ethically, with consent and mutual benefit, not through conquest and assassination. You want to replace the consortium. I want to make them irrelevant. Build alternative systems that are better, fairer, more transparent. It will take decades, maybe centuries. But it's the only way to end this cycle of conflict. Jake thought about that, about playing a long game measured in generations. It was so far beyond anything he'd ever contemplated that it felt almost abstract. But Valestra was serious, her pattern steady with determination that had carried her through 2 decades of war. "How can I help?" he asked. "By being yourself. By bringing perspective that my other advisors lack. By reminding us what we're fighting for when the politics get complicated and the ethics muddy. I'm not sure I signed up for changing the galaxy. You signed up to help me. This is what that means." 6 months into his new life, Jake finally brought the lucky break to Axios Prime. The ship had been refitted according to his specifications, with engines that could outrun military vessels and shields that could take a pounding. But the core remained unchanged. The same familiar cockpit, the same worn pilot seat. It felt like coming home. Valestra joined him for the maiden voyage of the upgraded vessel, settling into the co-pilot seat with practiced ease. "Where shall we go?" "I don't know." "Somewhere we haven't been. Somewhere that needs help." They flew to the outer systems, to the places Jake knew well, where salvagers and miners and traders lived on the edge. Valestra saw it all with fresh eyes, asking questions, listening to stories, understanding in ways her advisors never had what life was like beyond the core worlds. In a mining station where the air recyclers were failing and the corporation that owned it had abandoned the workers, Jake and Valestra bought the station outright and gifted it to the miners. On a frontier world where colonists struggled against hostile local fauna, they funded defense systems and agricultural technology. Small acts, barely noticeable in the vast scope of galactic economics, but to the people they helped, everything. "This is what you do with wealth," Valestra said as they left another station where freshwater purification systems were being installed. "Not hoard it, not use it for power, use it to solve problems. Seems obvious to me. It's not obvious to most beings with resources. They forget what it's like to struggle. You never will you? I spent 30 years scraping by. That doesn't leave you. Good. Don't let it. Don't let this life make you forget who you were." A year after he'd answered that first distress call, Jake stood before a gathering of the Sovereignty's Economic Council, presenting a proposal that would have seemed insane to the salvager he'd been. A comprehensive plan to create fair trade cooperatives in the outer systems, giving workers ownership of their labor and removing corporate exploitation. The councilors listened with varying degrees of skepticism. Lord Kethis, who'd questioned Jake's appointment, spoke first. "This is idealistic but impractical. The outer systems lack infrastructure and education. They cannot manage complex economic systems." "They can if we help them," Jake replied. "Provide training, technical support, access to markets. Don't just extract resources from them. Invest in their success. Everyone benefits. The costs would be substantial. So are the costs of maintaining military forces to deal with the rebellions and piracy that spawn from desperation and inequality. This is investment, not charity." The debate ran for hours. In the end, Valestra backed Jake's proposal, and her support carried enough weight to approve a trial program in 3 systems. It wasn't everything he'd hoped for, but it was a start. "You're learning," Valestra told him afterward. 6 months ago, you would have tried to implement this everywhere at once. Now you think strategically. Show success in small scale. Build support. Expand gradually. I'm learning from you. We're learning from each other. That's what partners do. The consortium made their move again 18 months after Jake's arrival on Axios Prime. Not with military force this time, but with economic warfare. They flooded key markets with below-cost goods, trying to undermine sovereignty trading partners. They spread rumors about Lumineth reliability, suggesting that Valestra's near death had shown weakness. They funded opposition movements on allied worlds, creating instability. Jake watched it unfold with growing frustration. This is more insidious than battle cruisers, and harder to fight, Valestra agreed. We can't simply destroy economic attacks. We have to counter them, outlast them, prove our reliability through actions. They worked 18-hour days, coordinating responses across dozens of systems. Jake's practical experience became invaluable, his understanding of how trade actually functioned on the ground level, giving Valestra insights her traditional advisors missed. Together they crafted strategies that stabilized markets, supported partners, and exposed consortium manipulation. It was exhausting, it was frustrating. It was nothing like the clear-cut danger of running from battle cruisers. But slowly, steadily it worked. The consortium's economic attacks foundered against coordinated resistance. Allied worlds stayed loyal. New partnerships formed. "We're winning," Jake said one night, reviewing the reports. "We're surviving," Valestra corrected. "Winning is a much longer game." 2 years after answering a distress call, Jake Morrison stood on a balcony overlooking Axios Prime's capital, watching the sunset in colors that still sometimes took his breath away. Valestra joined him, her presence familiar now, comfortable in ways he'd never expected. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "The life you left behind?" Jake thought about the lucky break sitting in the royal hangar, about the salvage runs he'd never make again, about quiet days drifting through debris fields with nothing but his thoughts and the stars. Sometimes it was simpler. Simpler isn't always better. No, it's not. He looked at her, at this alien queen who'd become his partner, his friend, his purpose. "I answered a distress call because it seemed like the right thing to do. I had no idea it would lead here." "Would you have done it differently if you'd known?" "No, I'd do it exactly the same." Valestra's patterns blazed gold, bright enough to cast shadows. "Then we're both fortunate, Jake Morrison. You needed a purpose beyond survival. I needed someone who saw me as a person before seeing the crown." We found each other in the dark, and everything changed. "Everything," Jake agreed. Below them, the city sparkled with bioluminescence as night fell. Somewhere in the palace, advisors prepared briefs on the next day's challenges. Out in the galaxy, the consortium plotted their next move. Alliance partners waited for guidance. Billions of beings lived their lives, unaware of the quiet war being fought to keep their systems stable and free. And Jake Morrison, salvager turned consort, stood at the heart of it all, no longer running from danger but facing it head-on, partnered with the wealthiest being in the galaxy who'd turned out to be so much more than her fortune. He'd saved her life twice, and in doing so, saved his own from meaninglessness. The galaxy hadn't gotten smaller or simpler, but it had become home. The future stretched before them, uncertain and dangerous and full of possibility. Together, they would face it, not because of debt or obligation, but because they'd chosen each other when choice was all they had, and that choice had changed everything.